The set was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes between takes or during commercial breaks. This was different. Tight, loaded. The energy had shifted before they even went live. Stephen A. was scrolling through his notes, doing what he always did, controlling the room before the cameras started rolling. Shannon? He wasn't reading anything. He was watching. Then the red light blinked on live. The segment started like any other banter. Pacing, loud takes that felt familiar, until Shannon leaned in, subtle at first, but deliberate. The host tossed a question about quarterback rankings. Shannon answered with a jab, not at a player. But it's Stephen A., you know. Some folks change their opinion depending on who's watching, or who's in the room. Stephen A. froze for half a beat, just enough time for real ones to catch it. He tried to laugh it off. Now, hold on. Brother, what you mean by that? Shannon's smile didn't move. You know exactly what I mean. The silence after that was deafening. Producers in the booth stared at each other. The camera crew didn't move. The viewers. They felt it instantly. Stephen A. cleared his throat. We do a show. We debate. Sometimes it gets heated. Shannon cut him off. I ain't talking about debates. I'm talking about what you said when I wasn't in the chair. There it was. The line that cracked the whole thing wide open. The audience watching had no idea what was coming, but Stephen A. did. And for the first time in years, his voice dropped a notch. Shannon, I don't know what you think, I said. It's not what I think. It's what I heard. And it ain't just me who heard it. Stephen A. shifted in his chair. Suddenly, it wasn't a sports show anymore. It was something else, a reckoning. And Shannon was sitting in the seat of someone who had let the silence ride for too long. The air turned electric. Stephen A. tried to regain control. He was the anchor, after all. The face. The voice that never cracked under pressure. But this time, he wasn't debating stats. It was being called out. Live. And the room knew it. Shannon, he began, voice lower now, hands slightly raised like a man walking a thin line. If I said something out of pocket, let's deal with that off camera. Shannon leaned in. You said it on camera, Stephen. You questioned whether I deserved this seat. You said I was only brought in for ratings. That I was a sidekick, not a peer. The tension snapped across the screen like thunder. Stephen A.'s lips parted. Hey? No words came out. Because now the audience remembered. The clip had made its rounds, a throwaway comment during a radio appearance months ago. Something small, maybe? Something meant to be forgotten. But Shannon hadn't forgotten. I let it slide because I respected you, he continued. But respect ain't silence. Not when you throw shade with a smile. The hosts across the table sat frozen, eyes darting. Between the two, even the control room hesitated, fingers hovering over the commercial break trigger. But no one brave enough to cut this live. Stephen A. straightened in his chair. I never said you didn't belong here. You didn't have to. Kay, you said I was a temporary boost. That ESPN needed noise, not knowledge. You think I didn't hear that? The look in Stephen's eyes said it all. He knew, and the world knew now too. For the first time in his career, the master of debate was the one being debated and losing. Shannon sat back, calm, composed. But firm. I didn't come here to be tolerated. I came here to contribute. Kay, and if you can't handle that, say it with your chest. A long pause followed. No shouting. No theatrics. Just truth. Heavy. Unapologetic. The silence that followed didn't need music. Didn't need editing. It was the sound of power shifting live, unscripted. It's undeniable. Stephen A. finally blinked. His fingers tapped the desk like a metronome. 1, 2, 3 if counting the exact moment his media armor had cracked. He opened his mouth, closed it again. This wasn't debate. This wasn't showmanship. This was real. I didn't mean to disrespect you, he said slowly. But if I'm being honest, didn't think we'd work well together. Shannon nodded once. Now that's the first honest thing you've said to me on air. The audience watching at home sat still. Millions of them, holding their breath, not because it was explosive, but because it was honest. This wasn't a segment. It was a mirror. Stephen A. cleared his throat again. It wasn't personal. It was about chemistry, about timing. Then say that, Shannon replied. Don't go out here telling folks I'm a sidekick. Don't smile in my face and sell doubt on my name behind my back. Boom. Clipworthy, shareable, and completely unscripted. Backstage at ESPN, producers watched in stunned silence. No one knew whether to cut to commercial, ride the wave, or brace for fallout. A junior associate whispered, "They're going viral in real time." Within minutes, Twitter exploded. Shannon just made that man shrink on his own show. This ain't first take, this is last nerve. Respect isn't given, Stephen. And Shannon just collected his. Stephen A., visibly rattled, tried. To regain footing, let's move on to the next topic. Nah, Shannon cut in. This was the topic. You started it. I'm just finishing it with clarity. The camera panned wide. The table looked divided. The show wasn't collapsing, but it was transforming. In that moment, Stephen A. Smith untouchable. Stephen A. looked human, not defeated, but checked, because sometimes the biggest moment isn't a shout. It's a truth that finally walks through the front door and refuses to sit in the back. The moment the cameras cut, the tension didn't know. Applause. No off-air banter. Just silence, thick and sticky. Stephen A. took off his mic with hands a little too quick. Shannon didn't move. He stared at the table like he was still measuring the weight of everything he'd just said. A producer walked over, slow and cautious, like they were approaching two lions after a fight. That was intense. Stephen A. didn't respond. He stood up, adjusted his cuffs, and walked toward the hallway without looking back. But Shannon. He stayed seated. Calm, not because he won, because he was finally heard. Down the corridor, behind. Studio doors. Skeks gathered in a glass-walled office. Already buzzing with urgency, one looked up from their phone. This clip's already everywhere. TMZ's grabbing it, Shade Room's quoting it. Twitter's ripping it into pieces. Another added, what's the plan? It's crisis or capital? That was the real question. Was this a meltdown or the most authentic television ESPN had aired in a decade? Outside the studio, Stephen A. stood alone. Oh, assistants, no makeup crew. It's just him and a hallway full of echoes. He pulled out his phone. Read the trending tab. Stephen A. got exposed. Shannon wasn't just speaking for himself. That wasn't confrontation. That was accountability. For once, he had nothing to say back. Inside the studio, Shannon finally stood. A younger staffer. Passed him his phone, hesitated, and said quietly, that meant something. Shannon nodded. No bravado, no chest thumping. Just a calm awareness. It should have happened sooner. Meanwhile, the internet raged on, and one tweet said it best. Stephen. I built the table, but Shannon just taught him how to sit at it with real ones. The follow-up didn't come through ESPN. It came through a podcast draw. Unsponsored, off the record, in all the ways that mattered. 2 days after the confrontation, Shannon Sharpe sat across from a friend in a dimly lit studio. No suit. No script. Just a mic and a voice still heavy with truth. The host leaned in. You knew what you were doing when you said that live, didn't you? Shannon didn't blink. I knew exactly what I was doing. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He looked tired but clear. The kind of clear that only comes when a man stops carrying someone else's silence. I sat in that chair, day after day, listening to jokes that weren't jokes. Passive shots dressed like compliments, and I let it go, 'cause I didn't want to make it about me. He paused, looked down, but I realized. The longer you let someone talk around you, the louder their story becomes, and the quieter yours gets. The host asked, why call him out now? Shannon leaned back, because sometimes silence protects the wrong people. That clip, Jess. 14 seconds was all the internet needed by noon. It had 4.2 million views. Fans weren't just agreeing, they were unpacking. Athletes posted it with captions. Like, he said what we've all felt. That part right there. You don't call it backstabbing when it's finally face-to-face. Inside ESPN, the tone shifted. Quiet meetings. HR calls. Executives talking not just about ratings, but about respect, and Stephen A. Still silent, no tweets, no clips. No podcast episode because now he wasn't in control of the conversation. He was the subject of it. A former producer on First Take posted a cryptic message. A lot of us knew it. Few of us could say it. Shannon had the weight in the mic. Post went viral, and the comments weren't asking for an apology. They were asking for honesty. Meanwhile, Shannon's podcast numbers doubled overnight. But he didn't talk trash. He didn't spin the moment. He just kept it real. I'm not perfect, but I'm not disposable either. And when you act like a man's voice is a seat filler, don't be shocked when he finally stands up. Somewhere in a quiet office, Stephen A. finally pressed record on his own mic. He didn't rehearse. He just sat back and whispered, "I underestimated that man." Stephen A. didn't post a tweet. He dropped a full episode. No guests. No co-host. Just him sitting under studio lights that suddenly felt too bright, with a silence that hadn't been scripted out. He leaned into the mic, breathing deep before the words came out. I watched the podcast. I heard what he said. No music. No intro. Just confession. And I'll say this. I got caught up in protecting a brand, and somewhere along the way, I forgot how to protect people. He paused. I said things. Off the record, offhand, in interviews. Things I didn't think would circle back. But they did, and they should have. It wasn't an apology not right away. It was a realization. Unfolding live. Shannon Sharpe didn't just check me. He reminded me I ain't untouchable. That even in this seat, with all this legacy, I can get too comfortable and too careless. The internet exploded. Not with hate. With surprise, Stephen A. finally owned something. This is the most human I've ever seen him. It ain't just drama, it's evolution. On First Take, the producers hesitated before scheduling them to appear on the same day again. It felt risky, tense. But the ratings. Sky-high. So they did it. The reunion. No fanfare. Shannon at the desk. Stephen A. across from him. This time, no performance, just presence. Stephen A. opened first. I disrespected you. On camera, off. Camera, behind closed doors. You don't owe me forgiveness. But the audience deserved this moment. Shannon didn't blink. He simply said, I didn't do it for the audience. I did it so I could walk into this room without swallowing my pride. That landed heavy. No claps. No dramatic music. Just two men sitting in a room. Acknowledging something that had lived in the dark too long. Later that night, Shannon posted one line, clarity. That's all I ever needed. And Stephen A., on his own account, responded, respect. That's what I had to relearn. The audience didn't need a winner. They had witnessed something rare accountability. Accountability. On air, in real time. ChatGPT said. The cultural reaction didn't feel like a viral moment. It felt like a shift. Clips from the reunion episode circulated instantly. But it wasn't just fans reposting it, it was people across industries. Politicians, musicians, authors, people who had never even watched First Take suddenly quoting ShannonSharpe's.com response. I didn't do it for the audience. I did it so I could walk into this room without swallowing my pride. That sentence became a headline, a tweet, a screensaver, a sermon, because it didn't sound like a clapback. It sounded like freedom overnight. Think pieces started popping up. Why Shannon Sharpe's confrontation was bigger than sports. What happens when black men address conflict with outrage? The real MVP was vulnerability, even ESPN personalities. Often tight-lipped and overly cautious, began chiming in. Malika Andrews tweeted, "What Shannon did, necessary, and overdue." Not just for him, but for the whole industry. Yalin Rose went live and said, "It takes courage to stay seated and still speak truth." That wasn't a beef. That was a breakthrough. Meanwhile, younger anchors and new talents inside ESPN started holding their heads a little higher. A few even met privately, started a group chat sharing stories, comparing notes. They were realizing something Shannon had just proven. You don't have to earn your seat by swallowing your voice. In corporate offices, the conversation turned inward. Execs began reviewing tape, not sports tape, but meeting room culture. Post-production edits, mixed up segments. They started re-examining the house style of discussion. It's the quiet favoritism. The subtle tones that shaped legacy behind the scenes. ESPN wasn't just reacting to headlines, it was reacting to the weight of clarity. And how little of it had ever made it to air before. And somewhere in a small studio in Atlanta, a rising media producer sketched out the first notes of something new. A docuseries pitch. Working title. Undisputed Voices. What happens behind the mic? The pitch was simple. Let the real moments live. Let the real men speak. And stop cutting the truth just because it doesn't fit in 28 minutes. And this time, they had proof the audience was ready. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't a contract. It was a moment. Weeks after the televised confrontation. After the podcast confessions and the public ownership. Shannon Sharpe walked into a room not filled with cameras or executives, but with students. A university had invited him quietly. No media, no handlers. It's just a chair, a podium, and 300 young people waiting to hear a man speak. Who had just shaken the most polished table in sports television. He didn't talk about stats. He talked about silence. About being invited to a seat. But not being heard once he sat down, about professionalism. Being weaponized against authenticity, about how easy it is to become a caricature. When you're only allowed to speak if it fits someone else's brand. And then he said it, I didn't confront. Stephen A. because I wanted to end something. I did it because I was tired of not beginning. The students stood, not for a performance. For the truth of someone who had just given them permission to stop shrinking. That moment went viral, not through ESPN, but through phones. Reels, stories, snippets whispered from one generation to the next. Back at ESPN. Things were already shifting. Producers began encouraging talent to challenge hierarchy. New analysts were being vetted not just for polish, but for perspective. They wanted voices now, real ones. Not seat fillers. And Stephen A. He watched it all unfold, not bitter but humbled. He took a step back on a few episodes. Let others lead, not out of retreat, but out of recognition. One evening, at an event honoring Black voices in media, he and Shannon stood side by side. No tension. No PR handlers. Just two men who had gone to war with silence and survived it. Stephen raised his glass and said quietly, "We made it messy. But we made it matter." Shannon replied, "Let's not let it be rare." The applause was quiet, because the real work wasn't loud anymore. It was steady and finally shared. The call came late. Unannounced. Skip Bayless never called. Not directly. Not since Shannon had walked away from Undisputed with silence in his rearview mirror and legacy under his arm. But this time, he did no cameras, no show, just a voice on the line that hadn't cracked in years. "Shannon, I saw the episode." Silence. Then he added, "You said things I should have said years ago. I think I was too proud to hear them when they were meant for me." It was an apology, not quite. But it was something. Shannon didn't speak at first. He let the weight hang. Then, finally, "Took you long enough." Skip laughed a rare, tired kind of laugh. "I had to watch it happen to someone else before I realized how often I let it happen with you." They didn't say much more, but they didn't hang up in anger. Because something had shifted again, not in public, but in the background. In the invisible current between two men who once sat across from each other every day. Sparring, not just for sport, but for survival. A few weeks later, Fox Sports reached out. A one-time reunion, not permanent, not a reboot, just one night, unfiltered, unfinished, unapologetic. And Shannon said yes, not for closure, not for attention. For clarity, the night aired live, just a black stage. 2 chairs, 2 voices, no graphics, no scoreboards. Just a banner that read, "The table never broke." Skip opened first. "You were more than my co-host. You were the voice I wasn't ready for. And sometimes I buried it under mine." Shannon nodded. "I let you, until I couldn't." The conversation that followed wasn't fireworks, it was repair, layered, honest, full of edges that didn't need to be smoothed, and when it ended, neither man stood to hug. They just sat in silence, breathing the same air, because healing didn't need applause. It needed space. The next morning, media outlets ran with headlines. Shannon and Skip unfinished but understood a conversation years in the making. They didn't reunite, they reckoned. And the audience? They didn't ask for more, because what they'd just seen was more than content. It was proof that when real voices speak not to win, not to trend. But 2 heel and broken tables can carry the weight. The moment didn't fade. If anything, it multiplied. Clips from Shannon and Skip's reunion were clipped and stitched into essays, reaction videos, Twitter threads, and even university lectures. But it wasn't the barbs or the history people replayed. It was the silences, the way both men paused not to deliver punches, but to choose their words with the weight of people who had once talked past each other every day. A particularly quiet moment went viral. "Skip, I needed to be right so often I forgot what it meant to be fair." "Shannon, I needed to be respected so badly. I stayed longer than I should have." That hit deep. It wasn't just about a sports show anymore. It was about work, about voice, about how easy it is for pride to become policy, that silence to become the only way you stay in the room by the end of the week. Producers across networks started whispering, should we be letting more of these conversations happen? The answer was already obvious. Because the reunion hadn't just pulled numbers, it had pulled truth out of a format that had buried it for years, and Shannon, he didn't stay. The reunion was just that, a return, not a restart. Instead, he walked straight into the next thing, a platform of his own, not a podcast, not a sports. Desk, a full studio, funded, backed, independent, and titled simply Sharpe. No gimmicks, no panel. Just long-form conversations with athletes, artists, thinkers, people who had been loud for too long or quiet for too long. He wanted to host the voices that weren't edited for segments or shaped for THUMB and AILs. In his launch promo, he said one line that echoed back to everything. "I spent years learning how to say it right. Now I just say it real." The show debuted with record-breaking numbers. Guests didn't perform. They unraveled. And Shannon didn't interrupt. He gave them what no one gave him for too long: room. Meanwhile, Stephen A. watched. Quietly, he didn't. See competition.ec continuation. On his own platform, he said it openly. Shannon Sharpe made us all better. Some of us just didn't know we needed it until he left. The audience respected that, because real legacy isn't who shouts loudest, it's who stays loud after they walk out the room. Shannon's new show didn't just trend, it became a blueprint. And somewhere in a quiet studio in Mississippi, a young broadcaster with a borrowed mic whispered into their phone, "You don't need to get louder. You just need to mean it." Okay. Because that's what Shannon taught them. That's what the confrontation unlocked. And that's why the table was never broken. It was just finally made wide enough for everyone to sit.